So Safra Projects has been going for about more than a decade now, since 2001. And we were a collective of queer Muslim women, and we had some non-queer Muslim women, but all women. And it's a women-run project, and that's how we began, and that's how we still exist. Our focus is around sexuality and gender issues within Islam and Muslim communities. And I'm going to be looking at the work that we do around policy, because our key aim of why we started up was to look at researching the issues that our stakeholders face and how that affects policy in the UK context. I'll touch on a few subjects, but I hope that we'll have a chance to speak in more detail in the Q&A section. So, you know, if you want questions, I hope we'll have a chance to talk about that later. So the structure of today, I'll try and keep on track. So a bit more background on Safra, the policy themes that we work on, an analysis to a degree of what that policy work has led us to, and some next steps for not just for us but for you as well, because I'd like this to be useful for you in terms of not just listening what Safra does, but how this could relate to you perhaps in your work, whatever that may be. Okay, so this is what Safra Project is. We're a resource. We've often used the term Muslim, lesbian, bisexual, trans women, LBT, but more and more we're using the term queer. Some people are comfortable with that, some aren't. You may know some of the debates around that, but we try and include everyone. We also begin to use more the term of same-sex relationships, but we're trying not to exclude our trans and bisexual members, so it's using certain terms depending on the context. So we're quite a flexible, fluid organisation in that sense. We are not a faith group, and that's very important for us to make a distinction about what we do. We work with all types of organisations that are looking at inclusionary and diversity issues, but we recognise that faith and culture is not easily extricable. They're very much linked to each other and often confused with each other. But we do try and work with both areas, although we're not a religious organisation. So again, a bit more about why we set up. I'm not going to read it out to you, I'm sure you can see for yourselves. But it's been a challenge. We've been going over a decade, and the empowering work has been very much related to our policy work as well as our support work. So as a result of our policy, lots of women we were engaging with, that we were trying to have conversations with, also felt that they needed a separate space, that they could meet other queer Muslim women and have a social space. And that's been part of our work, and that affects how we raise awareness and towards addressing prejudice and discrimination. So the policy themes we work on. One of the key reasons we set up Safra Project was to look at the diversity within our communities. Number one, people don't always recognise that there are such a thing as queer Muslim women. And then they don't realise about the different issues that they face, which is often the same issues that you or people you know may also face, but there are intricacies that are related to faith, to the interplay with race, and of course, what we're talking about here today as well, gender and sexuality. So we started off looking at these key 8 themes of policy, and this came about through a series of working groups, meetings and a conference that we held. We held those meetings with our stakeholders, our core stakeholders being queer Muslim women, but we also held it with other stakeholders, people within the statutory and legal services. And that's how we came about with these themes, because that was the main areas that came up about in conversations and in people's needs, in terms of information they wanted and support that they needed. We wrote a report back in 2002 on these themes, and since then we've been developing each theme individually. If you ever look at our website, you'll see that we have a section for each policy theme, and we do various reports, bits of research and policy work, etc. Consequently, one of our key kind of messages has always been that these themes, our work, is not single strand. It is interdependent, and they do interplay on each other. We'll find that the women we work with will not come to us with one issue around asylum. There'll also be an issue around housing, or education, possibly even mental health. So for us, although these are separate themes to make it easy for people to view and read and learn about, they all depend on each other, they relate to each other, and there's lots of cross-play between each other. So I'm going to give an example. So the identity of our women, an example here of different identities, they're one part of a holistic identity of one person. They're not separate, and they are interdependent, as I said. And a case study quite recently we had is of a young Muslim woman who was seeking refuge. She needed to get away from some domestic violence from home. Her parents found being abusive towards her. There was a case of potential forced marriage. You know, they'd booked the flights, they were going to take her abroad. And so she approached us. And what we did, we contacted a number of refugees in the UK. She wanted to come to London because she lived outside of London, and she felt that was safer for her not to be within a close proximity range of family that would see her on a day-to-day basis. So we contacted a number of refugees in London, and for us the issue wasn't just about her sexuality or the fact that she was facing domestic violence or the fact that she's quite a young woman, she's 21, and the other issues around her own faith. For her it was very important that as a queer Muslim woman she still wanted to be in a space where her faith would be respected, and so we spoke to a number of refugees saying that, you know, we have this young lady, she needs a place to stay, she needs somewhere to safe, but could you also accommodate her dietary needs, like she shouldn't have to share, you know, utensils and food spaces, for example, where there's pork. And this is a common response. On the whole, they said, no, we can't. And understandably, to some extent, I know why the situation is, because our refugees in this country, Women's Aid, have been drastically cut in terms of funding and resources. So what we would do is we would, you know, from our own group, we would get some pots and pans, mark them separately and give that to the young woman so that she could use those utensils, not necessarily the refugees' utensils. But it's a shame because refugees are there meant for everyone. They have policies in place around, you know, anti-discrimination and being inclusionary. But in practice, the difference between a policy and application is huge. And it varies also very much on the capacity of an organisation. The statutory sector in terms of social housing have a lot more resources. They can accommodate these requirements in terms of space, in terms of respecting a person's faith and cultural identity. But when we come to the refugees, the voluntary sector is great work that they do, and I'm part of that sector, massively under-resourced. The policy that, you know, central government has put in place in terms of accessibility, inclusion, isn't played out in practice because they don't have the resources, they don't have enough staff on board, they can't afford the staff. It's a very difficult position that they're in and that we're in for the women that we're trying to support, because obviously they're coming to us expecting us to be able to give them that kind of very specific assistance. So it's a challenge, and it's not an impossible challenge, but it is a challenge and it's something that we're constantly working with. And it's something that we're working with both in local government, because we do a lot of work with local statutory organisations, and to some extent central government. Although, to be honest, our recent government hasn't paid much attention to anything we've been saying. But we're still trying. We continue to try. And so the way we go about it, more so on the local statutory authorities, is that we try and meet with social services, we try and meet with the voluntary sector representative, we work with, if possible, even try and see the chief exec wherever possible, and, you know, try and raise our issues, saying that, you know, this is not something separate, this is part of your core work, because you're getting funding for all your community. These women are part of your community, and they need to be, you know, have their issues addressed too. You know, having a generic service doesn't always, you know, isn't always often suitable for the women that we work with, because it's not going to apply to them. So it's an ongoing conversation. And I just want to give one more case study example. We have a number of young trans women and more older trans women that are involved in the Safra Project that come to us for support. Similarly, when they've come to mainstream trans groups, they have faced, you would not believe, an incredible amount of Islamophobia. You know, if they come in with a rucksack, they have been told, we don't want you to come in with a rucksack today. And the assumption is, you know, Muslims, rucksacks, terrorists, bombs. And it's a ridiculous claim to make, but people are saying this to their face, and they're being quite serious about it. It's not just a joke, it's not having a laugh. You know, they have told women, you can't come into this room, you need to go, you can't come in with a rucksack. It's ridiculous. So we've then tried to have conversations with these organisations and said, you know, you've got policies in place. We can do trainings with you to try and improve your way of working. But on the whole, to be honest, it's not been a very positive response. They feel they've done enough, in their work, and they're catering to the main trans community, and that's enough for them. And that's a genuine response that I've been getting within Safra Project in all the years I've been working. Very few trans groups and other queer LGBT groups, mainstream groups, have been receptive to what we've been saying, or taken on board in practice the policy guidance that we've put in place. As I mentioned earlier, we did a number of reports, and there are toolkits within those reports that are supposed to help people, and it's there for your use, and for other organisations' use. But whether they implement it or not is up to them, and whether they take on board our offer of assistance is also up to them. But we're hoping for there to be more change. And to some extent now what we're doing is working more with mainstream Muslim organisations. We feel that they're being slightly more receptive to the issues that we're raising. We're very pleased about that, because also Muslim organisations are based in communities that our stakeholders live in. They're the communities that they've grown up with, and the Muslim organisations also have responsibility to take care of their own community members. So we're doing quite good work, I feel, with our own Muslim communities and raising issues around trans and sexuality issues. I'm just going to highlight here, in a few weeks' time, Safra Projects is going to have a conference. And what we're doing is, we're taking the policy work we did 10 years ago, and the journey that we've travelled over those 10 years, and analysing that with what's happening today. So the conference is actually called, it's not on there, but it's called Queer Muslim Women Today. And I'd invite you all to register and attend. But what we're doing here is looking at how policy has changed over the last 10 years in the UK, and how that affects queer Muslim women. The morning session is open and the afternoon is going to be closed. But we will be doing a report from this Saturday 6th of July event, and that will give you a nice encapsulation of a 10-year period. It will give a report of what's happened, where we are today, and what can happen next. And this report we're going to be conducting that was the first report we did, and that's a kind of a screenshot of that first report. So the new one, we haven't got a front page for it yet, will be called Queer Muslim Women Today, 2013. And if you want to know more about the previous report and the reports we have currently, I'm happy to talk to people a bit later today, but I have to leave quite soon after lunch. But also I'm going to be posting my information of my contact details shortly, so you can also ask questions there. So the next steps for us. So currently there continues to be very little formal research around policy that's related to queer Muslim women. And so there needs to be more of that needs to take place, and around the interplay of the factors that affect queer Muslim women and the factors of the different themes within policy that interact with each other. In terms of the work that currently exists, it's not being profiled particularly well. Safra Project, we're an entirely voluntary organisation. We do as much as we can, but we rely very much with our partners to profile our work. So within the voluntary sector, the academic sector, the statutory sector, what we do is we work with our colleagues there and hope to profile our work and the policy work through those channels. And in terms of practical application, we offer training for organisations on how to put policy into practice. Because I think policy can often seem very, great ideas, nice strategy, but how does that work in reality? And that's what we try and do. And it's also something we work with our partners with. So it's not always us having to do the trainings and the information raising. We also hope that academics who have done some work with us can also be our ambassadors to an extent, and ambassadors about inclusionary work generally. So these are the kind of main areas that we think the next steps need to be developed on, need to be worked in more detail on. And we hope that people here today are going to be interested as well in taking on these next steps as well, so that you're also ambassadors for us. And for me, it's also about sharing work. It's not about just our work. For us, because we're an inclusionary organisation, we want to share the work that you're doing, that other speakers here today are doing. We want to take that forward, so we're ambassadors.